You have also written a book on the challenge of, I think, making theology, but also of discipleship in Islamic context. What are some of the things that moved you to write that book, Duane?
Yeah, so that would be, I think you're thinking of living among the breakage,
That's right.
contextual theology making and ex-Muslim Christians. So that was my doctoral dissertation from Edinburgh. It was later published by Whitman Stock with, a couple of basic additions and some small additions. What inspired me was we had been living in the Middle East in a country that's 97% Muslim, and my wife and I were studying Arabic there. And I had actually met a couple of believers who came from a Muslim background. And this was in the, I don't know, the mid noughts, 2005, 2006, like that time. And at that time, I was reading a lot of the stuff from IJFM, the International Journal of Frontier Missiology, and some other publications. And I was noting that there was a whole lot of stuff by mostly Western missionaries who were talking about what believers in Christ from a Muslim background, we'll say BMBs, what they should look like. And I thought, okay, well, it's interesting enough. But what I was really interested in is like actually just getting to know these believers themselves, especially in the context of their communities, and asking what do they think, rather than here's this prescriptive thing by a guy who was a missionary and giving you his thoughts, which I'm not saying is not valuable. It can be valuable. But what if I just went out there to these actual believers and asked them, what are you concerned with? What are you thinking about? What are your main concerns, in life? Because, for example, for one missionary, they were really concerned with, what does the BNB do during the Ramadan fast? Should they fast or not fast, or should they fast but like for Christ, or like what should they do? But then, if you actually go talk to the BNB, some of them are like, I don't really care about that. I mean, I'll fast, and but they don't have a lot of theological development about that topic. This is just one example. But what they're really concerned about is the question of where am I going to get a wife, or how do I raise my children now that I've become now that my wife and I have become Christians, but we live in North Africa where our kids have to go to Islamic courses at school, and like these are the issues. So I wanted to look at questions of importance. So that's where I got into the issue of contextual theology making. And I found that, yes, these BNBs, and I looked at some Arab communities and some Persian communities, they are actually engaging in the process of theology making or proposing theologies. Now, it's not normally a systematic or analytical theology in the Western tradition of, Karl Barth or Thomas Aquinas or the Institutes of Religion or what have you. It's more of a pragmatic theology and applied theology, maybe what we'd call a wisdom theology. A lot of the theology is given in stories and anecdotes, kind of saying this is what's good, what is not good. We have this in the Bible. The book of Samuel is all about, here are good examples and bad examples of how to follow God and how to govern people and how to be a prophet or a king or a warrior. Good ways to do it, bad ways to do it. And there's theology there, there's ethics there. It's just not the kind of systematic analytical tradition, which is indeed the kind of theology that is privileged in the West.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about your book is that process of theology making, which you described, brought into highlight the discipleship issues, the problems that Muslim background believers were struggling with, because they were wrestling with those issues. That was very rich and helpful to think about. I feel really excited about what God is doing across the Muslim world, but I also have a sense of the urgency in my soul that addressing this problem of helping the disciple making process along, or sort of going to where God is working and being part of that. Jonathan Edwards, the great theologian of revivals, had this really nice image. He says, when in the Old Testament, when God went out to war, you really wanted to be there. You didn't want to be at home twiddling your thumbs. And I feel like that about what God is doing amongst Muslims and the many that are turning to Christ. There's a kind of inflection point after 1400 years, where there's a readiness, a ripeness of harvest that is going to increase, I think, and there's an urgency to find ways of building these churches. I've just really appreciated your writings about this, Duane. One thing that really struck me about the modernist approach is that there's no liturgical aspect to it. You know, there's no there's this tradition in Christian tradition, there's this, and it's in the Old Testament, there's this concept of consecrating time. You know, that time is something that can be used to reflect godly truth. And so you have the seasons, Lent and Advent and Easter, Pentecost, and so on. And that use of time coming for societies of people who are very used to having a temporal structure to their worship, that seems really important. And I know you wrote about that, you've written about that, but I wonder if you could share your thoughts about in working with Muslim background believers, the role of time in building discipleship.
Yeah, you know, a lot of Christians are just not aware that there is this whole kind of a built-in calendar to the church here. The oldest church calendar that we know of was a weekly calendar. Every Sunday was Easter. Every Friday was Good Friday. Every Wednesday was the betrayal of Christ. So that's the oldest calendar that we know of. But pretty soon, it didn't take very long, you have the development of a yearly calendar, and it begins with Advent. And I love this as a pastor and as a preacher. You know, I like it that hey, here's a time of the year where you need to reflect on the fact that Christ is going to return someday. Maybe that's not what you would just normally want to preach on, but these are the readings you have, and that's what they're about. And then Christmas, and we won't go through the entire calendar. I have it all there in the book. I will give them an everlasting name. But I think that that idea, almost going back to the medieval kind of vision of a sanctified cosmos, is something that is really, really healthy and really good. And the anecdote that got me started thinking about this was from another Anglican minister who was working in Asia Minor, and he had discipled a man, and the guy said, "Okay, well, I've just left this whole calendar of holy events where God has kind of ingrained in the year an entire series of celebrations and memorials, and I've left that for Christianity, and you guys give me Christmas and Easter, that's all." Mm-hmm. And so this Anglican priest, actually at that time he was not Anglican, he became Anglican later on, and that was one of the reasons why that drew him into the Anglican way. Obviously, we're not the only Christians who have a church calendar. We share it with the Orthodox and the Catholics and many Lutherans and Presbyterians and so on, and it really is the patrimony of the entire church. But that was a thing that got him thinking, is that all that we have? If we are inviting someone to come from Christ and to be a disciple of Jesus, but we don't have a sanctified year, that seems like a real problem. So I've always liked that anecdote. So I think having that sanctification of time can be really, really valuable.
I found that, and the converts actually really want that, and they miss it. I've watched the way the Iranians celebrate Nowruz, which is their New Year celebration, and it's a sort of secular celebration, but it's deeply meaningful for them, and it's an affirmation of Persian identity and culture, and the use of time is important to them. So yeah, I found them very enthusiastic about Advent and Pentecost and Lent, and it's quite meaningful to them.
And pushing back against that modernity, which is very intellectual, right?
Yes.
Because the beauty of the church calendar is we have things. So we have different colors to wear during different times of the year. And now different churches will be minimalist or maximalist in this, but just think of the Advent wreath. I mean, it's a beautiful thing that you can look at, and the children go and they light the candles, and the candles signify different things. And if you're used to it and don't want to reflect on it, fine, but it's something that is there, that is sacramental. One of my professors at Edinburgh, he was not working on this area, but he has a great phrase: matter matters. And I think for the kind of sacramental theology That is a beautiful observation. Matter matters. And being able to change the colors and change the way that we worship, or like the stripping of the altar. I mean, that is a very dramatic gesture. And doing these things with physical matter, with colors, with smells, they communicate something about who God is and what it means for us to follow Christ. That simply like reciting words or memorizing a phrase, it doesn't get there. And interestingly, in regard to Nowruz, you know Persian history probably better than I do, but that is a pre-Islamic holiday. And when the Muslims got there, they wanted to get rid of it, but it was so deeply ingrained from the Zoroastrianism of the people that they just couldn't do it. So they just kind of tried to adapt it and sort of, I'm not going to say baptize it, but to Islamize it a little bit. But it's a great example of just how the traditions of the people are so deeply ingrained that even though a different doctrine comes, sometimes you just can't get rid of those traditions.
The anthropologist and missiologist Hebert pointed out that cultures that are stable and are resilient have a high level of integration of cultural themes, artifacts, products, structures, worldviews. Things fit together in many different levels. And that includes everything from architecture through to rituals, the time. I was thinking, for example, in Bali, which is a Hindu society, and they believe in reincarnation. So the basic model of time in Hinduism is circular. And not just the religion, but the calendar in Bali is circular. In fact, it's a calendar that has a series of cyclical weeks. There's 10 different weeks, systems of weeks running all the time. And every now and again, they all come together and they have a festival. And also Balinese music, the gamelan, is built up on a whole series of cycles. There's a gong that hits every 2 beats, one every 4 beats, another one every 8, another one every 16. And every 256 beats, the biggest gong is beaten. Then you start the cycle all over again. And I was thinking about that religious idea that reincarnation is cyclic, and then it gets replicated through the structure of the calendar, through the music. And you have this intertwined, integrated system of meaning on multiple different levels. And I think for people coming out of Islam, one of the hardest things is loss of identity, loss of knowing who you are and in relation to other people and family. And there's a lot of trauma associated with damage to that identity and separation from family and so on. So being able to offer Muslim background believer Christians an integration of a world, which includes liturgy, worship, patterns of prayer. People from a Muslim background, they want to learn the Lord's Prayer off by heart. They want to learn the creed. Like, these things are powerful for them and often overlooked, because we think of them in our Western tradition that they're just forms, they're not ideas. And Western, particularly Protestant culture, is very driven by ideas. You disciple people by getting their ideas right and everything else follows. But people aren't necessarily like that. They need a holistic transformation of their life, from inner healing through to knowing how to place themselves in time. It's fascinating, I think. I think it's such an exciting time to be thinking about these things. Sorry, yeah.
Well, and I will give them an everlasting name. That's one of the recommendations I have is, help people to memorize the Apostles' Creed. I just found with young Christians in the United States, I don't know what Australia is like, many of them very sincere, maybe have like a very lively personal faith. But if you say, so just tell me briefly, what is Christianity? Or what is the Christian faith? A lot of times they'll like quote a verse to you, like God is love. Okay, well, that is a Christian belief. It's a verse from 1 John, but that is not an adequate summary of all of the Christian faith. Or John 3:16. Good, okay, these are not bad, but give me something brief but condensed that is going to give you the main points. And I think the Apostles' Creed is a great example of that. 12 simple lines. Of course, according to early church tradition, one from each of the apostles. Probably not happen like that, but that's fine. It's a nice story. Sometimes the story, the myth, is actually more important than the history. I think we need to recognize that. And if you can just recite the Apostles' Creed, I mean, that is giving somebody a concise summary of what Christians believe. And what I also like is that when we use something like the Apostles' Creed, we're not giving them an American or Australian or Indonesian or Russian slant. We're not necessarily giving them Christianity in the 21st century or the 14th century or the 7th century. We're using something that has been tried and tested by the church in every land, at every time, in every tradition. And it's a great treasure to have to pass on. In terms of the word discipleship, I like what you're saying, that we have this kind of overly rational, the modern approach, as Little calls it. Um, I almost wish we could get rid of the word discipleship and use another word, which is apprenticeship, because I think that the Greek word, in that as we find it in the New Testament, it's a lot more like being an apprentice, like the same way that you would learn how to change brakes. You don't learn how to change the brakes of a car by reading a book or by listening to a speech. You learn how to do that by like being there and observing a person who does it, and then asking questions. And then maybe eventually he says, okay, you try this, but I'm going to supervise you. And then you try it, and then you can evaluate, what did you do right? Did you forget something? What could you have done better? And then eventually that's how you actually learn how to do it. I mean, I think discipleship is much more, it's much less rational, and it's much more, go into the town and find the guy with a jar of water. It's much more, go into the town and buy some food. I'm going to wait here at the well. Like, I think those things are all part of the discipleship that Jesus did with his disciples. And then he does okay, what you have seen me doing, a group of 70 or 72, you go out and do it, and then come back and we'll evaluate it. I mean, I think that kind of like apprenticeship is a much more complete biblical, Greek, I don't know, Semitic, I don't know what the right word is, way of understanding discipleship.
I think that's exactly what the word mathetes in Greek means. It means learning by doing, basically, with someone else. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. And it's only by, as it were, launching into a process and actually getting involved in it that you can master it and be able to apply it to your own life. And it's interesting. I think it's interesting to see Jesus debriefing with people, preparing them before they went out, coming back and talking about it. It's a pattern of action, reflection, discussion, teaching, a cycle, that's very, very strongly represented, I think, in the Gospels. I've come to see the Gospels as a record of the discipleship of Jesus' followers. It's like these are studies in apprenticeships, really. And that's the main focus, in a way, apart from the sort of the major events such as the baptism of Christ, the transfiguration, the death, the resurrection. These are sort of major reference points, but that's all being processed through this journey of apprenticeship as people are walking with Jesus. And he keeps warning them about how serious it is, that the journey that they're on, and what he's calling them to do and the cost of it. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I mean, I've found in working with this congregation and helping them to come to spiritual freedom and maturity, there is the spiritual engagement, renouncing Islam, breaking those curses, setting people free, casting out demons sometimes. And there's teaching as well. I mean, there are gaps. I sometimes think of it as teaching into the gaps. If you want people to stop gossiping, you have to unpick with them why it is they do it. And it's to feel better than other people. It's to push others down. It's to help you kind of have this sense of superiority. And people need to put that to death. They need to actually think, I don't want to live like that. That is really harmful. So that process of being taught and thinking about Christ's example, which is so strongly presented to us, of his gentleness and refusal to take offense. But there's also another step, which is walking with someone through all that, learning how to do that with someone else that you trust, who can guide you. We had this interesting experience with this community where at first we had no money, and everyone was volunteering, really. But it got to the point where there was enough money to pay someone a bit, to lead. And at some point I said, I said to the couple, I think you're going to have to tell the congregation what your financial arrangements are. This is the Anglican way. You've got a church council, you've got church wardens, they have oversight over the finances. And we want people to give to support the ministry. They need to know where the money's going, because one of the big problems the Iranians have around money is they just don't trust clergy. They've had too many experiences of being ripped off, and that's a big issue for them. So I said, we're going to have total transparency about your stipend. It can't be a confident. They were very reluctant at first. Like, this is just completely contrary to Iranian culture. You don't share such information because you make yourself vulnerable to being attacked. Someone might say, I own you, lots of reasons that it was just really difficult. But I said, no, I think it's really necessary. And it's essential to have giving as well. People will not give until they can trust, and they won't trust if they don't know. And so there was this process of teaching, but also doing, and then walking with them, and supporting them, and then debriefing. How's that going? And then finding out that actually the church council is pleased that they're playing the pastor and they want to help raise more money. And so you see a kind of mature approach to finances that becomes healthy, instead of one which can often happen in Muslim background believer contexts, where the pastor will never tell anyone about their personal arrangements, and that produces lack of trust, and it damages giving. And so, you need someone to walk alongside you in these journeys, because you're going into unknown territory. It's like you're going into unknown waters, uncharted waters. I'm speaking for someone who's left Islam and walking the way of Christ. There's all these risks that come up because your cultural scripts don't work anymore, and you have to find a different way. And having someone to walk along with you, to be apprenticed to, is really, really important. To comfort, to pray, to support, to encourage, to grieve sometimes. It makes such a huge difference to have someone to walk with.
I think of my own life. I was not raised in the Christian church, any Christian church. But when I was a teenager, I got involved with a small church in Mexico. Actually, converted to the Christian faith when I lived in Mexico. So I am the fruit of Christian mission to Latin America. I don't have any Mexican ancestry, but I was living there at that time. I have Colombian, hence the flag over there. On my mother's side, we're Colombians. But there was a youth pastor there who was a missionary from Texas. And what I really remember about him is he would, meet with me, and we would study scripture. And I'm sure that I learned something from our Bible studies. But what I really remember is hanging out with him and his family, and seeing how he interacted with his wife and kids. And that is really what impacted me. Now, I think when he was writing his letter to his supervisor or to his supporting churches, he'd be like, oh, we're studying, I don't know, 1 John. I think we studied 1 John, with Duane, and he's a promising, young believer. But for me, it was not actually that didactic study of 1 John that really blessed me. I mean, again, it was not a bad thing. Teaching does have its part, as you correctly point out. But what really got to me was just seeing a Christian family functioning. I had never really seen anything like that before. That's what really impacted me.
Yeah, so. I think Dudley Woodbury's research showed that the most commonly reported reason for Muslims turning to Christ was seeing what he called the lifestyle of Christians, the way they related to each other, and feeling attracted to it. And then that gives you a rope to hang on to. It gives you steps to. It creates a stairway for you to move forward, to have that. Yeah, it's interesting in the epistles how often Paul emphasizes presenting an example. And when he's writing to Timothy and Titus, I think he also says, let people see your example. And of course, that's what Jesus was doing. He was saying, follow me. And the word follow actually means in Greek to be a disciple. In fact, I mean, that's one of the meanings. If you look up akolutheo, I think it is, in the dictionary, you'll see one of its meanings, the following, is being someone's disciple. So they learned that from Jesus. They saw him do it, and then they took that on board. So you're providing that context where people can walk with you. So is so important. Yeah.
Well, great, Mark. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. This has been a wonderful discussion. I think we've talked about some really, broad, far-ranging topics, and I love talking with you because you just have so much experience and so many insights as a, I don't know, Pentecostal Anglican. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Anglicostal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
that's
go,
right.
Anglo-Costal. But let's wrap up with something real practical. Maybe each of us, we could think of one piece of advice for the local pastor or minister who's watching or listening to this conversation. What do we want to tell them? Because, you and I, we've been doing this stuff for a long time. We both have doctoral degrees. And I think it's pretty easy for someone to say, well, that's great. That's great that the church has people like, Mark and Duane. But what's something that I can do, in order to play part in God's mission to Muslims today? Because I'm totally on board with you and in agreement that we live in an exciting time, and God really is doing something that until the 1960s it was just
unheard of,
almost unheard of.
Yeah. Who are we to be living in this time of amazing grace? Well, I'd like to offer this, that if you're a pastor and you know someone in your area who's leading a group of Muslim background believers and they're a convert themselves, they've left Islam and they find themselves being a pastor or leading, come alongside them, offer to walk with them, to talk with them about their downs and their ups and the challenges they face. They desperately need a friend who they can trust enough to share about their journey and to receive your wisdom and love them. It's going to be time consuming. I've been spending a couple of hours a week with this couple for 10 years now, and that's what they need: regular, frequent companionship, to talk, to pray, to seek your wisdom. You would be blessing many people if you did. If you just could help one person, many people would be helped.
Amen. Yeah, and my piece of advice would be, if you have a person from a Muslim background, whether they're a convert to Christianity or just someone who is kind of a friend of your congregation or someone there, just remember that the church, the local church, has to become a new home for the convert from Islam. The convert from Islam is probably going to end up being alienated from his family and his friends and his colleagues in his neighborhood. So just the kind of standard, people show up once or twice a week for, I don't know, Wednesday evening Bible study and Sunday morning church. For some Western Christians, that's pretty common. That's fine, and it seems to be enough for them spiritually. But for the convert from Islam, they really need a new family. So take that to heart and understand that their needs and their context quite a bit different than what you're probably going to have to provide for most other people who come from a Christian background in your congregation.
Well, Duane,
thank you all.
Duane, it's such a delight to talk with you. I really enjoy. It's amazing, isn't it? We live on other sides of the world, yet so much interest and common interest and similar heart, I think, as well. So thank you.
Amen. Well, thank you too, Mark.